Hello and welcome to today's flight. Today's flight will be taking place on a Boeing 747-200 modeled by Felis. The version of this aircraft is 1.0.4.1 at the time of this recording. The intent of this flight is to demonstrate how to do VOR-to-VOR navigation on this particular aircraft, which obviously will vary from different airplanes that you might have flown in X-Plane or other simulators, such as your standard GA airplanes, or even airplanes that I've demonstrated it on, like the 737-200 made by FlyJSim. So this particular video will talk about the avionics that are used to do VOR-to-VOR flight and hopefully get you comfortable with the concept. In the Show More tab, you've seen a listing of the fixes that will be flying over the route going from New Orleans down here in the south up to Memphis, that's north of our departure airport. This route, if you look at it, is quite zigzaggy, and that's intentional. You would normally not fly a route necessarily like this on the Victor Airway system, but I think it's a great practice run for this particular concept that we're covering today. I've also included the hyperlink that will bring you right to this page with these this particular route depicted. The only thing you might need to do is switch the tab up on the top right to World Low, in case if it's on VFR or something else. I'm also going to be referring back to the Navigraph charts because it uses the tracking feature so we can demonstrate where we are in the flight. So far what we've done for the setup, and we'll cover more of the setup as we get airborne, but I just want to show you for now, before you attempt to depart to do the same thing and follow along on your route, we've already entered in the Picayune VOR, which is 113.95 into the radio. So we've put that on the left side, which is the captain's side, and that is the nav1 on 113.95, and we've ensured that the source selector for the horizontal situation indicator is set to radio navigation. Make sure that it's on radio. We've also set in 113.95 on the first officer, which is the nav2, and that's also set to radio navigation for the HSI. The other thing to keep in mind just before we take off is that even though we've tuned in the VOR, we're not receiving a signal. And I can tell that first and foremost by the fact that there's a barber pole here, this nav flag, that means it's off, it's not receiving a valid signal, and the course deviation bar, which we commonly call a course deviation indicator or a CDI, is centered at the same time. And also there's no mileage showing up in distance measuring equipment indications 1 or 2 from the other side. However, sometimes you don't get any DME information if the VOR does not present it. So let's get this airplane going, and then we'll talk more once we're airborne. And we will check back in once we're stabilized in a climb and receiving a valid signal. We'll see you in just a few moments. Alright everybody, welcome back. We are stabilized in a climb on the way up to 10,000 feet, as we described probably earlier. I don't know what you noticed, but when I climbed through about 700 feet, I noticed that some activity started to show up on our horizontal situation indicator here. I saw that the needle deflected, some distances popped up. So that gave me an indication that something was happening, some kind of signal was coming in. And we're going to take the aircraft, like I said, up to 10,000. And we're going to start working on potentially turning toward our course. So what we're going to do is we're going to use our imagination, and we're going to say, United 576, clear direct to the Picayune VOR. Picayune VOR. Okay? And basically what will happen is, in reality, typically air traffic control would actually give you a heading to go along with that. But we're going to cut that out for today. We're going to just practice the techniques as if either we were trying to find it ourselves or we were not given that. That's no problem. We can do that. So our airplane is stabilizing at 10,000. Looking pretty good here. And let's start off by just looking at what do we need to do in order to determine what direction we need to go in. Well, just to show you a couple of things first, the first thing I'm going to do is just notice once again the components of this horizontal situation indicator. Now, we call it the horizontal situation indicator because basically it's this fantastic device that has a VOR indicator laid on top of a heading indicator. And because of the way they work together, a horizontal situation indicator will show you your aircraft, and it will give you a picture sort of the course that you have selected. And this horizontal situation indicator essentially indicates your situation in a horizontal sense, right? And because of that, it allows us to maintain a level of orientation, and most of the time we will never encounter this thing called reverse sensing, which you will see with many types of VOR indicators that are more of a basic type, but that's beyond the scope of what we're doing today. Okay, so what we're going to do first is we're going to look at how does this thing actually work, how do we set it? Well, one of the things that we're going to look at up over here in the corner is that we have a course selector up here. We have two course selectors, and if you look carefully, let's go like up here and sort of rezoom a little bit. Rezoom as in zoom in again. All right, and on the left side I have a course and it says number 1, and on the right side I have a course and it says number 2. So the number 1 course is our nav1. All right, and what we do is we put a frequency in this side over here on the captain's side, and that's our nav1. And then we also have a place for our first officer's side, and that's nav2. And then whatever we select on this course will appear on this HSI, and what we select on this one will appear on this HSI. All right, that is of course if you have the radio/INS button or switch set to radio. That's what we want to make sure of as well, that those are set to radio, if I didn't mention that earlier. Cool. Okay, great. So if I turn that course selector, which is also called an OBS by many of us because it's an omni-bearing selector, but in this airplane we'll call it a course selector. And if I click it like this, look at that, I'm changing the course, and look at the HSI down there over there on the lower left. You can see that it is changing as I click it every time, or I can hold it down. All right, so we can see that. Cool. Hey, look at that. We just saw the needle move at one point. And if you spin a course selector around, it will come centered. And notice that the course arrow is basically, let me just highlight that. The course arrow is the side where this yellow arrow is pointing, and then you can read the heading. So it's 150, 160, 170, 180. So it's going to be about 171, 172. And if we look over here, yep, there it is, 172. Now watch what happens. If I spin it around 180 degrees, it will come centered again. Okay, cool. So now the question is, well, what do we do with that? Well, when they tell us United 576 fly direct to Picayune VOR, what we're going to have to do is center this course indicator with a 2 indication. Well, what's a 2 indication? This arrow is our course arrow. This arrow, this hollow triangle, is our heading bug that's being controlled with, hold on, let me zoom out a little bit. All right, the heading bug is being operated with this. Watch, if I turn it to like 0, 80, you can see over here it moved it. And look at our attitude indicator. The airplane is following the heading bug because we have the autopilot roll mode. All right, the autopilot roll mode set to heading. All right, so that's being controlled by the heading bug. So we have a course selector, we have a heading bug, and then we have another arrow over here that is basically this to from indication. And we need to interpret it. We're going to interpret if it's a to or a from. Okay, and I'm going to show you how to do that right now. If I center this, right? If I center this and I see that the course arrow is facing one way, and the to from indicator is the opposite direction, that's a from indication. If I center this, again, spin it around, spin the course selector around until it centers again, and now they're both on the same side. The to from indicators are the same side as the course selector. That's a to indication. All right? And basically what we can do right now is, and notice that it's drifting because we're in motion. We're going at ground speed 280 knots. So if we center this with a 2, as per, well, ATC said fly direct to the station. So what we do is we center it with a 2, and then we just read the heading, 335. And you can see it on the course selector. All we got to do now is turn the airplane to 335. Okay? Let's go ahead and do that. I just looked up here and saw we should have our heading select onto altitude hold, and we look out the window, and boom, we can see the airplane turning. Beautiful. Okay, step 1 of flying direct to the station is taking place. While we're doing that, let's compare what we think, or where we think we might be, to what we can see on a chart. So we took off from New Orleans, and we are going to fly this zigzaggy route, as we talked about, to Memphis. And since we took off out of runway 11, which essentially faces east-southeast, it makes sense that we're somewhere over here, because we took off in this direction. Now, I'm going to confirm that with our tool, Navigraph. Not everybody watching this video has this, but we can see our course, our airplane's position is in fact over here, and we're turning toward the VOR. Pretty cool, right? All right, great. Let's just let's see, which way are we facing? Let's pretend for a moment that ATC said to us, 576, turn right heading 360 for traffic. All right. All right, so we're going to do that just for a couple minutes. All right, so we're heading out this way. Excellent. Okay, so our airplane is basically flying along toward the north. What we're going to do in the meantime, though, is now that we have an idea of how to fly direct, what we should do is we're going to set up our other VOR that we do have the frequency set for to do the next step. So in other words, the current mission is to fly direct to Picayune VOR, but then what are we going to do after Picayune VOR? We're assuming that ATC is going to basically let us fly our planned route. So if we go back to the FAA chart that most of you probably have, because it's Sky Vector, it's linked in the show more, as I mentioned before, and we zoom on in. So our route, as we briefed earlier, after Picayune is going to go outbound on this Victor 555. In order for that to happen, in order for us to track on the Victor 555 toward McComb, we're going to have to track the radial that will keep us on Victor 555. And that specifically is going to be this 324 radial. As you might know, and we might have mentioned, every VOR essentially transmits 360 radials that we can use, okay? Transmits the signal allowing us to use 360 radials, 1 per degree. And we need to navigate on this 324 radial outbound, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to set up the nav2 to do that, because what we're going to do now is again, we're going to be cleared direct to Picayune, but then what we do next is go outbound on the 324. So simply what we do, we come on over here, and we see that, let's see, I guess, where are we here? We got 160 dialed in right now, and you could see our our horizontal situation indicator is dialed in the way it is. We're going to turn this to 324. So I'm just going to spin it around. I don't care if it's centered or not. Right now, I just want to set it for that outbound course. All right. Excellent. We're good to go over there. Let's see. What else do we need to do? Or what else? Oh, you know what we should do? One of the things that's very important is, since we only have a certain amount of frequencies available to us in our navigation on our radio transmitters, when we tune the frequency, we also have to identify. Now, for the scope of what we're doing in this particular demonstration, I'm not going to tune and identify each one of them, but in reality, that's good practice, and most SOPs would require it. Okay, so let's see, how are we going to do that? How would we identify that this 1395 is actually the Picayune VOR that we need, and not some other VOR somewhere else that happens to be, for whatever reason, or giving us a signal, or maybe we thought we dialed in the correct frequency, we accidentally dialed a nearby VOR. That can happen a lot of times too. Well, there's this line of dots and dashes, and that's your Morse code. Each line is for each letter here. So for Papa, Charlie, Uniform, the first line is for Papa, right? The dot is a short beep. The long dash is a long beep. And then you have another long beep, short beep, long beep, short beep, short beep, short beep, long beep, right? That's what we should hear. Now, do we have to memorize Morse code? No. That's why they give it to us on the chart. So what we're going to do is simply come on down here and say, well, how can we actually listen to it? All right, so, whoops, turn the wrong thing here. So I'm going to zoom on in here to this panel, and this is your adjustment for your comms. This is a source selector where you'd hear audio when you're talking to ATC, and volume control. And then by default, your NAV's volumes will be low, but if you have an active signal and you turn this up, you'll hear static, and then you might hear something. Let's listen. All right, there. Let's listen to it again. Right, that was beep, 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 beep. Sounds like a positive identification to me. After you positively identify, you can turn it back down. And then the next VOR will end up doing that. Okay, so that's basically how you tune and identify. All right, tune and identify. Okay, so now that air traffic control has had us on this vector for a while, they're kind to us to say, United 576, once again, fly direct Picayune VOR, and then resume own navigation. So let's once again do that quick exercise for tune and identify. We're going to look over here, and we need to center that with what? If I turn it to the right side, it comes centered, and it says, oh, turn to a heading of about 110. However, look, we have a from indication. That would turn us away from the VOR. It would go the wrong way. Let's keep turning it. Spin it around one more time. Center it with that 2. It's going to move pretty fast because we're pretty close to the VOR now. We're only 16 miles away. All right, so let's go ahead and turn at 285. So I'm going to turn my heading bug to 285. Okay, here we go. All right, but notice that we're close. We're going quick. This is called DME, distance measuring equipment. And basically it's sensing another signal coming from that VOR station location. And many times it's like a co-located transmitter. And notice that we're sort of drifting off that course. So if we just rolled out on 285, the thing is we will not actually cross the VOR. And they're counting on us to do that. So but ATC, instead of requiring us to intercept and track inbound, which we haven't covered yet, we're going to do that next. They actually allow us to recenter one more time and then keep the turn going to go to the VOR. And beautiful, we're 13 miles, less than 13 miles out. We're looking pretty good here. I think we're going to cross this station, no problem. Excellent. Okay, so a couple things about what's happening. Right now, what we're doing is we're on our way to the VOR on a 275 course. And if we were to come back over, let's conveniently use Navigraph. And here's our airplane. It's now heading to the station. By the way, if you don't have the fancy maps of Navigraph, hey, just go ahead and set low en route on your, hit the M key, then scroll in or use the wheel. Notice that when we flew, we made a curved flight path, which has a radius. So think of the faster you go, the wider you turn, the greater the turn radius. That's a factor in what we'll be doing today. But you just press the letter M key, it brings up the map, and you could zoom in and out with the plus keys, minus keys, or you can use your scroll wheel. We're a little bit off. Let's go ahead and now we're committed to tracking. So since the course is a little bit off to the right, I'm going to turn to the right a little bit to get that back centered. But we're pretty close. Everything is moving fast now. Okay, here's another thing. We're referencing this distance. It's called DME. This has a limitation in that it's called what we call slant range. In other words, depending on how high we are, that's the lowest number that we'll ever read when we cross the station. So since we're 10,000 feet, MSL, and this is nautical miles, and we're near the sea level area, well, it might tick down to like 2, 1.9, 1.8, or maybe even 1.6 or so, but then it will never go to 0 at this altitude, all right? It will eventually just start counting back up, all right? The only time it'll ever read 0 is if you're about to hit the VOR. So let's get back on course here. I'm not going to chase it anymore, even though it's going to go off, right, off center. And now what we're going to do is we're going to say, well, when do I officially cross the VOR, right? So I cross the VOR when this 2 indication flips to a from. It's currently a 2 because it's on the same side as the course arrow. So it's now less than 2. Watch what's going to happen. It's going to get pretty quickly. It's going to flutter. We might even get an off flag. It just depends on how much we cross the VOR, right overhead or off to the side. Looks like it's just going to oh, we lost the signal. This is called the cone of confusion. All right. And we don't want to try and navigate during the cone confusion. But look, now the flag went from a 2 to a from. So we have now officially crossed the VOR. There it is. We just went across it. Right? And if we look back on our map view over here and we zoomed in, you see how we kind of made that correction, got back on that, 275 inbound course bearing over the VOR, and now we're outbound, right? Okay, but here's the problem. Now what we need to do is we need to make the turn to get on course. And we can't just fly direct to this other VOR out here. We have to get on this thing. So the first step that you do after crossing a station is you take the airplane and you turn it. So where are we going to turn it? Well, what we were doing now is going 275, and what we were doing next, right, is going to go to 324. So we're going to turn to 324. And this is called paralleling the course. And what that's going to let us do is when you parallel the course, it allows you to maintain a situational awareness. It allows you to maintain a situational awareness that then helps you determine which way should you turn to actually get onto the course you have to be on. With this type of instrumentation, it's pretty easy to skip that step, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Now what do we do with the NAV1? Well, since what we were doing next is now what we're doing now, let's match it up to 324, because this is what we're doing now. We want to track the 324 radial outbound from the VOR. Okay, so we've set that up. But if we look over here, all right, we look over here. Whoops, I didn't want to really hit that. I'm not on course. I'm 10 miles. Whoa, sorry guys. Okay, I had my right click sort of locked in there. I'm not on course. The cool thing about that horizontal situation indicator is that here's my plane, here's the course. It looks like the situation is I'm left of course. I have to turn to the right. Okay? So we're just going to do that. And we could confirm that on this map, but you wouldn't be able to do that on here. We just have to make the interpretation. So we need to turn, we came across Picayune, we made a right to parallel 324, and now we have to do an intercept. So typically, once I'm past 5-6 miles, I might do an intercept of about 30 to 45 degrees. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the airplane, we're going to take the heading. 324 plus 30 is 354. So let's go ahead and set that up. Okay. And here we go. The airplane is now turning toward the right. All right. We're 14 miles out. And if we wanted to confirm that, right, we're somewhere out here. It says we're 14 miles out. We're going to try and get on this 324 radial. And if we wanted to confirm that on the Navigraph chart, yeah, it looks like the plane is now heading toward this. If you wanted to confirm it in your map view over here, and you would set up the low altitude en route, you'll have the chart, you'll have the airways listed as well. Pretty good map overall. Has some limitations, but I think it's pretty cool. Okay, and now we should get on course. If I want to, since we're already 16 miles out, let's do a full 45 degrees. Okay, what do we say? 324 and 40 is 364 or 004, so we can do that. And what we're going to watch for is that this is going to come alive in a little bit. Here, no, not yet. And then once it comes alive, depending on how fast it's coming in, we will then set up to turn the aircraft to stay on the radial. All right, cool. Now here's another thing. Since the nav2 is set up for also what we're doing now, what we really need to do is set up for what we're doing next. So, because that's the logic, right? Nav1 is what we're doing now, and Nav2 is what we're doing next. Well, the next VOR, that if we want to stay on this Victor 555, we're supposed to switch at the halfway point to McComb. So that's the general rule. We typically switch in the halfway between one VOR to the next VOR on an airway. McComb is on 16.7, so let's go ahead and get that dialed in. The CDI is already coming in for Picayune, but we can get in 16.7 in the meantime on the nav2. Okay, and this is starting to come in a little bit closer. So instead of rushing, let's start our turn back toward the course. All right, and while that's happening, see the airplane is now turning to the left. And let's have a quick look at McComb. You can always rewind the video if we get a little lost or pause it. We need to then factor in the 145 radial to take it inbound to McComb to stay on Victor 555. So let's go ahead and roll this airplane, let it get back on course. Notice that since it's a shallower angle, it's coming in slower. We are 23.3 miles out from Nav1, which is Picayune, and 28.4 decreasing on Nav2. And the way you tell the halfway point between two VORs on the FA charts is in this box, the 52. 52 divided by 2 is 26. So at 26 on here and 26 on here, we should then switch to 16.7. But here's the thing. We never set up that 145. Well, we can only go two ways on this 145 radial, either outbound in the direction of 145 or the reciprocal inbound. Just add 180 degrees and you can get basically something like 325. Okay, look at that. We have that pretty well centered. We passed the halfway point. So what I'm going to do now is we're now going to navigate the rest of the way on here. But Nav2 is what we were doing next. And since we're now on our way to McComb, that's what we're doing now. So what are we going to do? We're going to set the Nav1 course to 325. Okay, and then we have to switch the frequency to McComb on 16.7. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, of course, we would have been not just tuning and identifying before. So let's go ahead and put that. Notice that, you know, at one point, like the flag disappeared, right? I mean, the flag came up and the signal disappeared. DME was gone, but we got to get down 16.7, right? Okay. And it's now counting down. We're looking good. Let's just sort of turn a little bit more onto the course because we're going a little bit too far. And now we're on our way inbound to McComb. We can just sort of set it up so that we, you know, re-intercept. So I'm going to actually line it up perfectly on the course. And X-Plane has this weird thing in this particular airplane. I think other airplanes too, where sometimes you have to be like 5 degrees to the right or the left to stay on course. So we should drift back on. All right, now that was pretty frantic, like all this stuff happening. Normally it's not like that because I purposely delayed things so that we could see a whole bunch of things in action. But normally you would turn the airplane, twist your course selector or twist your OBS to the new course. You would talk to ATC. It's like these 4 or 5 T's that you memorize when you're doing your IFR training, right? If you were going into a hold, and set your time if you're going to hold, all this stuff. But we're not doing that. And we would have done that all over the VOR. We would have had extra time. We wouldn't have swung that far off course. Still not coming in very much right now. So why don't we go ahead and then just turn a couple degrees to the left. Okay, cool. So we're inbound to McComb. This should come in as we do this. Now, we did say that we're going to start demonstrating other modes of the autopilot, the mode control panel, and the autopilot. So we're going to do that on the next turn. After McComb, right, once we cross it, to stay on the airway that we have planned, we're going to go from Victor 555 to 570. So out of McComb, we have to turn to a course of 287. All right. So we should set up the nav2 to what we're doing next, because we're going to do that in 12 miles. All right. So let's come on over here. We said 287 is going to be set up here. Cool. Excellent. 287 set up over there. So now we have our nav1, what we're doing now. Nav2, what we're doing next. Everything's looking nice. Maybe go a couple degrees to the right because this is drifting the other way now. And yeah, pretty cool. All right. We'll check back in a minute. All right, we are inside of 3 miles to McComb. And like we said before, once we cross this station, we need to turn to a course of what we're doing next, which is 287 out of McComb to stay on the airway. And now we're getting real close. This is going to become real active. And here it goes, cone of confusion time. We're waiting for that 2 to flip to the from, so there it went. And now we're going to react a little quicker. We're going to turn to 287 immediately. Whereas for demonstration purposes earlier, we delayed that. Okay, now that I'm turning, I can twist to my new course on the nav1, 287, right? We're still using the same frequency because we went over McComb to go outbound from McComb. All right, but now the next question is, well, should I actually just turn parallel? Will that get me onto the course? Or should I continue the turn? So I am actually going to continue the turn to a 20-degree intercept for now because we just crossed the station. I use the term station and VOR interchangeably. So we go from 287 to maybe 267. All right, and I'm going to see now that we're now on an intercept course. And look at that. Here comes the radial. It's coming in pretty quick. All right, because we're a little closer to the VOR when we intercepted compared to last time. So I'm going to let that come in. The further we go out, the more it'll slow down. But still going to move pretty quick at this distance. So now I'm going to start turning back onto course. You can see the attitude indicator showing us that we are back. Oops, I turned a little bit too much. All right. And it should roll fairly nicely onto course. There we go. That was a pretty good one. Anyway, you probably will find that you'll want to work the mode control panel and heading select just because it keeps you in tune with the aircraft. However, let me demonstrate now another feature, and that is that once you are on course, and actually we're going to show how you can do this when you're not on course yet, you can then take your roll mode of the autopilot controls on the mode control panel, and instead of using heading select, we can now switch this over to VOR roll mode. Okay, and it says VOR and LOC because it can actually track a localizer as well. So when I switch this to VOR mode, we're going to see some basically indications pop up on the autopilot annunciator panel, and since we have the flight director on, the flight director annunciator panel come up as well. And let's go ahead and try that out. Let's go ahead and put it on VOR. And notice there it is. And it's even going to make a little correction possibly. Okay, we might have sensed that you were a little off. Let me fix that for you. And now the autopilot is going to track the 287 course. We're almost 14 miles out. We should set up the nav2 for what we're doing next. So let's go ahead and do that. We were turning out from here. We only have 57 miles to Natchez VOR on 110.0. So we can go ahead and dial in 110.0. Okay. Looking good. And then we have to dial in the inbound course. So it is 106 is the radial that makes up this segment of Victor 570, but we want to go inbound on it, right? 106. So the reciprocal of that is probably going to be 286. Now, sometimes even though it's basic arithmetic, adding and subtracting 180, you know, when you have a high workload going on in the airplane, even the most basic math can mess you up a little bit. So personally, what I like to do is, let's say it was the 106, all right, like we just did. Well, when you are inbound to a VOR, the rate, this is kind of like a rule of thumb. When you're inbound to a VOR, then the radial that you're going to track on is on the bottom, the tail end of this needle, the tail end of the course selector. When you're outbound from a VOR on a radial, then that radial is on the top of the indicator. If that doesn't make full sense to you, don't worry about it. The main thing is we wanted to work with the 106, right? So notice here, this is 030, 060, 090, 120. This is 090, this is 100. So that's about 106. And all I got to do is look to the top and set my 286, right? So you got 106 up here. 106 plus 180 is 286. So sometimes the visual, hopefully that helped you and not confused you, but sometimes the visualization of where the radials are on the indicator helps a lot. All right, I think we're getting close to the halfway point. And so 57, all right, that's 26.3 miles is the halfway point from McComb to Natchez. So there it, whoops, I almost prematurely said it, right? So what did we say it was? It was 57, right? Yeah, we said 20. Why am I doing this wrong in my head? Not 23. It's, I can't even do basic math. When you get stuck in your head that you can't even do basic math, you can just look at the DMEs until they're equal. Okay, cool. So we can see that in that case, that can also rescue us, and that is now the DME2 is less than the DME1. So it's just another rule of thumb, so to speak. All right. So now, how do we switch? I'm going to intentionally demonstrate how not to switch. If I were just to take this right now and put this from 287 to 286, the airplane's going to start turning. I don't really want to see that happen. All right, that gets a little sloppy. All right, and these are pretty close, so I'm not too worried. If I took this frequency and I switched it to 110.0, all of a sudden it would lose, right? It would lose the signal. And if I hit an accidental, like here, let me show you. Like if I stumbled across an active frequency, I can get confused, and sometimes the airplane might even start turning to follow. So it's really not a good idea to do that either, right? So we were on, what were we on? We were on 17.2 before, right? All right. So in this, I'm sorry, 16.7. Okay. So what I do is I basically just take the aircraft, I line up my heading bug, right, with the current course I'm on. All right, so we'll make a little bit of an adjustment. Put this on heading select. All right, then I'm going to change this to 286, and then I'm going to switch this over to the frequency. All right, to 110.0, and it came off a little bit, but now I could, at my choosing, make a slight correction to the right, maybe by 5 degrees, because it's so minimal being off right now. And then I could put this on VOR again. All right, And, because we were a little sloppy on it, the airplane made a little bit more of an aggressive correction, but you get the idea. So, at the halfway point, take control of the airplane by using the heading select, is following your command, then switch from one VOR to the next. Now, there is actually another function I'm going to show you later on in the flight, but we're not there yet. Okay, we're inbound to Natchez. So now we got to set up to go outbound, the 307. So let's go ahead and do that. There we go. 307 is set up. Looking good. All right, 110.0, 307. Inbound on the 106. Course is 286. 14 miles to go. We'll see you just before we get there. Alright everybody, we are just inside of 3 miles. Let's make sure that we're on the heading select mode instead of the roll mode. So we'll put that on heading in anticipation of crossing the VOR. The current iteration of this aircraft is if you cross the VOR while in VOR tracking, it gets a little wobbly. And I'm not sure if the real Autopilot would have done that back in the day, but that's okay. We're back in heading select. We're watching the cone of confusion take place. We lost signal for a moment. Alright, and there we go. The to from flip has occurred. We've passed the station, and then we know that what we're doing next is on the nav2, 307. So let's go ahead and begin a turn to 307. So we got to turn the airplane, and then we got to twist our course selection to 307 to do what we're going to do outbound. Now, instead of paralleling the course, let's go ahead and continue the turn for an intercept, right? So let's go ahead and maybe do like a 10 degree or so, usually up to 20 degrees, so use a nice round number. Let's go to like 320, and we should see this start to come in pretty quick because we immediately began our turn. Last time, for demonstration purposes, we let the airplane fly a little bit off course, and look at that. It's already coming in. At this point, if I wanted to, I could put this on VOR tracking. I'll just let it come in a little bit more. You know, if you're flying VOR to VOR, you probably enjoy working the heading select just to sort of stay in tune with the airplane. But sometimes, of course, it's a good idea to engage the roll mode when you're in really busy situations. Let's say if you're on an arrival or something like that. And if you're talking on like online ATC clients like Pilot Edge or VATSIM, you're even busier doing the communication switches. So you got to utilize your tools and sometimes know when to disengage from them as well. So we're almost centered. I'm going to put that back on VOR tracking, and then at this point now I'm going to just sort of realign my heading select with the course of about, somewhere close to like 307 or so. Okay, cool. So now we're outbound. We are outbound from Natchez VOR. All right, so we came inbound on the 106. We went outbound on the 307. We could verify that by looking at this map view here. Right, and we did a pretty nice intercept. We tracked inbound, crossed Natchez VOR, and now we're going outbound on Victor 450, Victor 554. And we said before that the turn occurs over at TULLO. All right, so we have to set up for that now. This is a little different. This is an intersection turn versus a VOR turn. So TULLO, we call it an intersection. It's a 5-letter name. Every intersection typically has a 5-letter name. And it is basically 2 intersecting radials. In this case, it's the 307 radial out of Natchez going out to wherever the range of this VOR is. And it's the Monroe 157 radial. And where those two intersect form this intersection. They just happen to be nice equal sides of a triangle in this case, 34 and 34 miles, DME. So what we want to do is we want to set up for the turn. So even though we're tracking on Natchez 307, we have to set up for the inbound into Monroe. So the first thing we're going to do is dial in that frequency, 117.2. Okay, so let's go ahead and dial in 117.2. Okay, red warning flashing light came up. Sometimes when you're doing VOR location, VOR tracking, VOR localizer, and it senses a discrepancy, it will say, wait a minute, did you want that to happen? So we're going to acknowledge it by saying yes. So we said 117.2. Okay. And then if we wanted to, we could come on down and listen to the volume on nav2. Right? And then while getting the 157 information, we could also confirm, you know, the Morse code identifier. Yep, looks good. Okay. Great. Okay. So we can lower that, right? And we need to set up the 157. Well, 157 plus 180. All right, well, it's easier for me in my mind to just put this tail end of this nav2 close to like between 150 and 160. Okay, and then I know that whatever number's up here is going to end in a 7, so 337. And that math works out, right? 157 plus 180 is 337. Cool. Notice on our DME on both sides, DME 1 is what this side is, 22.923, and DME 2 over here also is what this side is, but it's always right and left. Some airplanes will reverse it for whichever side you're on, but this 747 keeps it consistent. So it happens to be that when we're over TULLO intersection, both CDIs would be centered and both should read roughly 34 miles DME. Alright, so let's go ahead and check that out. Currently this is 25 and this is 42. This is counting down, this is counting up. When this CDI finally comes centered, let's go over there and have a closer look at it so we can just see it better. Alright, let's use our arrow keys to move around the cockpit a little bit. I don't have a first officer preset saved. Alright. But once this comes centered, alright, while the other VOR is already centered because we're tracking on that portion of the airway, these would both be reading 34, but the fact that both CDIs would be centered, we'd be right over TULLO. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow that to happen. That'll cause us to basically slightly overshoot TULLO, because if I wanted to stay on course, well, if I fly right over it and I begin my turn, there's going to be a little bit of a radius of a turn, so we're going to go off, but then we'll just re-intercept. Alright? But just to sort of demonstrate what it's going to look like. And we can come on over here, and we can see that we're getting close to TULLO on the moving map as well. We're almost there. Less than 4 miles to go. By less than 3 miles to go. Alright. And what we'll need to do is once we cross, we'll have to go from a course of 307 to inbound to the next VOR on 337. So we already can see that the nav2 is very helpful. Now look, they're both centered. That's pretty much centered, and this is pretty much centered. And look, you can see how that all happened within a mile. 34.8 and 33.1 about. It was around there, right? So let's go ahead and just make the turn. What we're going to do is we're going to take this. We can set it to 337 now if we wanted to, and then just switch this over to heading select. Okay, set that to 337. We're going to see that the airplane has crossed TULLO and now is turning to 337. So now we have to set up the nav1. We were doing 307, but next was 337, and 337 is what we're doing now. So let's go ahead and set that up, 337. And let's set the VOR to 17.2, which is the next VOR. Okay. Notice that we're a little bit off course. We need to keep that turn going. Instead of 337, let's try go all the way up to we can go 357. Alright, the reason why I'm taking the full 20 degrees is even though it looks like it's only a little bit off, we're a full 30 miles out. So this needle is going to move very slow. If I had just crossed the VOR and I try to do that, this needle will move very quickly. So again, we're making that judgment call based on the way the instruments behave. And you can see the airplane is now heading back toward Victor 554 on its way to Monroe. Then, of course, we're going to set up the nav2 for what we're doing next. So once we go to Monroe, we're going to hit the station and we're going to go outbound on the 053. Okay, so let's go ahead and set this up for 053 on the nav2. Notice that we're almost on course over here. So I just have a little bit of time, 053, and it's almost centered. I'm going to just go ahead and hit VOR. Airplane's going to turn all by itself. I'm going to then line up my heading select with that course. You could have done it the other way around. You could have taken the heading select, turn it to 337, and then hit that. It's up to you. I'm sure procedurally, for every airline flying this airplane, they would have had specific SOPs on exactly what turns of the knob and press of the buttons you would have done in a precise order. Excellent. So now we have another 23 miles to go. We'll check back in just a few. Alright, we're just about to be inside of 4 miles on our way into our next VOR. So we're on our way to Monroe. As we said, we're going to turn after reaching Monroe to 053. Now in reality, many times pilots will start to lead the turn ahead of time, but I'm going to let it go just past it, and we're going to begin our turn. I'm curious if I can get it to register. Let's go ahead and set up this heading bug select here. If we'll see an armed indication before we see an acquired indication, just to demonstrate that aspect, because we didn't get to demonstrate it upon the first VOR tracking. So here we go. We're passing the cone. We're entering the cone of confusion. Lost the signal briefly. We're going to have the from show up instead of a 2. All right, and then our DME readings are now increasing once again. Great. So let's go ahead and turn to what course? Well, we have it in our nav2, 053. So let's go ahead and hit 053 up here. Okay. And while that's happening, let's go ahead and hit 053 on here as well. Okay. And we'll let this turn happen. Now it's a pretty long turn compared to what we've seen so far. So we can see that our airplane is swinging out. And the other thing that we'll do too is once we have this thing on course, we'll be set up on the nav. We'll set up the nav2. And then when we approach ANPI, I'm going to demonstrate the function of one of the functions of using this knob that says number 1 for this side, number 2 for this side, dual, and how we can use this potentially to lighten your workload a little bit, right? Okay, so we're rolling out, we're paralleling the course, but we're going to continue that intercept course. So let's turn it at full 20 degrees, which would be a 073. And then while that is happening, I'm going to go ahead and hit the VOR. Once it gets close to that, I'm going to hit the VOR tracking. And you see now it's amber. The nav flag is amber instead of acquired for green. And basically what that means is, okay, yep, I see that you want to track, we've armed to track the course that you've selected. It just hasn't come alive yet. But when it comes alive and we start to sense it, we're going to track it for you. Keep in mind that you should always have some sort of an intercept angle set up before you try to arm the VOR tracking. Otherwise, it might not actually bite. It might not lock onto it. So that'll usually get you in some sort of trouble. Now, I'm doing about a 20-degree intercept. If I want, I can increase this to 30 because we're already almost 10 miles out. And like I said, the CDI becomes less and less sensitive. It takes longer to come in. So we'll take another 10 degrees. And by this point, if we wanted to, we can go like a full 45-degree intercept. But I don't think I'm going to bother to do that. All right, for now. And there we go. Now it just went green. It's basically saying, okay, cool, we got it. And here comes the CDI. It's alive. So that acquired is basically telling you in a way like, hey, the course is coming in. It's doing the job. Excellent. All right. And like I said, once we get within about 10 or 15 miles from ANPI, I'll describe to you the one of the methods we could utilize with our selector for our number 1 and our number 2 source. Okay, so we'll check back in as we turn on course here. We'll check back in just a few moments. Alright everybody, we're back. We're currently 26 miles outside of Monroe VOR. Anapee intersection, which we mentioned before, we're going to make a turn. And the DME is 41 miles past Monroe VOR, where we have to make a turn. But you know what we didn't do before we cut out the last section is we didn't set up for what we're doing next. We just demonstrated the use of or the armed annunciator depiction on our annunciator panel. So once again, what we want to do is set up for what we're doing next. So we need 14.25 for Greenville inbound on the 203 radial. So we're going to come on back over here, set up 14.3 over there, and the 203 radial is going to be something like 023. All right, so we have that set up over there right now. Let's double check that frequency being 14.25. I think I accidentally set in 14.3, so let's go ahead and do that. Okay, there we go. And that needle's already coming centered because it turns over an intersection, the CDI. You'll see them start to come centered because we're further away from the VOR as opposed to when we get close to the VOR, it's quite sensitive. So this full-scale deflection happens much quicker for a basic explanation. We could always cover that in a more advanced video. But anyway, for now, let's just get into what we were talking about before, which was making use of the dual switch. So let me show you real quick. When you have it set on dual, then the number 1 nav is displayed on the HSI over on the number 1 side, and the number 2 and the number 2 information is displayed on the number 2. If I switch this switch to number 2, first let's go to heading select so we don't accidentally get pulled off course if something changes. So let's go to heading select, and then if I push this to number 2, watch what happens. Nothing on this side, but all of a sudden the left side resembles number 2. So when we switch from dual, if you look at dual, number 1 is displaying like this. Put this to number 2. All of a sudden, the information from the number 2 nav, first officer side, is also displayed on the captain's side, number 1. Now, if I put this back to dual, all goes back to normal. If I put it on number 1, now all of a sudden the captain's side, number 1, is also displayed over here. So how does that benefit us? So you can use it in various ways, and one of the ways I like to use it personally is when I'm setting up for my next course. So if we were originally back on VOR LOC, and I was going to then want to start to switch my course at 42 miles DME, which is almost centered here, all what I would have to do then in this case is just flip this over to number 2, and the airplane will start now turning based on the number 2. All right, notice that the airplane's roll mode is still on VOR, and for the time being what we did is we switched the source of the first HSI to number 2, and we're sort of taking advantage and reducing our workload in a way. All right, you might find that helpful. At that point, while that is now nicely turning and tracking for us, we can just now set up our number 1 for what we are doing next to what we're doing now. So 023 comes here. Notice that the airplane is still holding just fine. I don't know if you can hear in the background, but my dog is quite happy about that as well. All right, and then I just need to transfer this frequency of 14.25 over here as well. All right, so we'll go ahead and do that, right? It doesn't visually change much over here until I switch this back to dual. And notice that the airplane didn't budge at all. It's doing a good job. Look at how nicely centered that needle is right now. And we've done our turn over Anapee. If you wanted to look at it on your map view, right, here we go. We made a pretty good turn right over there. We're going on the course, or we could look at it as well over on your Navigraph source if that's what you're using to follow along here. We made the turn and we're good to go. Great. Once again, now we're set up to go inbound. I've basically just covered several different modes and techniques. We started with flying direct to a VOR. We covered turning parallel to a course, intercepting the course. We also covered the heading select use of the autopilot. Then we went into going from, instead of paralleling the course, direct turn toward the intercept angle. That might take a little practice. You can always rewind the video for that section. And then we talked about using the VOR as the roll mode to continue tracking. And now we just covered using this extra tool up here. All right, so we should feel pretty good about it at this point. But let's just go ahead and set up what we're doing next on the nav2. So we're inbound to Greenville. And if we come up over here, once again, inbound to Greenville on the 203 radial inbound, which is 023. And once we reach there, we're going to go outbound on 010. So we can come on over here, dial in 010. All right. And I think we're all set up for that. So we will see you just before reaching Greenville. Alright, we are just about reaching Greenville VOR on 114.25 as we've set up before, inbound on the 023 course. And we're going to be going outbound on the 010 radial. At that point, when we make that turn, pretty much we've covered everything we need to know about en route, VOR to VOR navigation, and how to use the mode control panel's various autopilot modes to do the job. So hopefully you feel like you have a pretty good understanding by this point. However, if you feel like sticking around for the next 2 or 3 segments, I will then further demonstrate the changeover point at halfway between Greenville and Marvell, and then another segment will take us outbound from Marvell and descend us down toward the altitude we need to be at to get onto the approach, and then we'll actually get on the approach and fly it again by radio navigation, just to demonstrate the full capability. So hopefully this video proved helpful for you if you're departing at this point. Otherwise, we will most definitely see you after we complete this turn. So, as we've been doing, we're going to make sure that the heading bug is lined up nicely with our course, since we're less than 3 miles away. I'm going to switch over to the heading select mode. Maybe a slight change in direction occurs at this point. Not a big deal. We're keeping an eye out for the to from flip to signify station passage. We're going to fly right through that cone of confusion. There it is. Here it comes. And we're in it now. And we're just past it. We have the to flip to that from. So let's just go ahead and turn to 010, what we're doing next. Great. And maybe we'll turn it to, like, let's say 005. Not much of a turn to make. We'll put this on 010 rather. Make sure that we're still on 1425. Yes, we are. So looks like it's going almost full scale deflection. It's already on its way back in. And at this point, what I'll probably do is just let the CDI mosey on in toward the center. And then I'm going to basically activate once again VOR tracking. So let's go ahead and do that. And then I can simply set up for our inbound course to Marvell, which will take place at the halfway point between Greenville, Marvell, 65 miles. So we'll go ahead and take care of that. So Marvell is on 109.6. Let's go ahead and dial that in. 109.6. And then we need the inbound course into Marvell. So it's the 193 radial outbound. So to go inbound on it, we need to do 180 degrees less, which is going to be 013. All right, I think we're all set up. All right, we are not too far out from the halfway point between Greenville and Marvell VORs. If we go back and look at the en route chart on the FAA version, it says 65 miles in this box here. And we've covered how typically, based on that information, you would switch at the halfway point. But if I didn't mention it before, sometimes there is a depicted changeover point, like there is in this case between Pine Bluff VOR on Victor 47 to Gilmore VOR. And what we're seeing here is that it is 97 miles between the two VORs. However, there's a depicted changeover point, which looks like a little letter, I don't know, like a little lightning bolt almost, that shows you 41 and 56. So the 41 with that little line pointing at Pine Bluff means that if you're coming out of Pine Bluff, instead of waiting to get halfway between the two VORs, you'd switch over a little early at 41 miles over to Gilmore. Or if you were coming out of Gilmore, you'd ride that a little bit longer on Victor 47 to 56 miles before switching to Pine Bluff. Probably somewhere near Pine Bluff, there's some sort of an obstruction in this vicinity that starts to block the line of sight signal, not allowing an aircraft to potentially pick up the signal to the halfway point between the two VORs if you were at the MEA of 4,000. So anyway, that being said, if we came back over to our routing, we see that it's 65 miles is the total length. So at 32.5, right, we would switch over. And that's coming up, basically. Nice thing about having two DME readouts with decimals is that you can pretty much see quite closely, that halfway point, which we just crossed. So what we can do is we can, whoops, wrong button here. We can go ahead and switch over to our heading mode if we want, just like that. Oh, you know what we could do? We could do the technique that we mentioned before. We could stay on VOR LOC, switch over to number 2. All right, and let's see what happens. We switch over to number 2. Notice that the airplane didn't turn very much because the autopilot is now tracking that, which was already centered on this side. And now we can set up the number 1 course for 013. And then we could set up the frequency of 1096. Okay. Right. And then we could switch this back to dual. And look at that. Real smooth transition. Saved us a step of having to line up the heading indicator bug with the course on here. We would still do that anyway, of course, just to make sure it's lined up to take over as needed. But yeah, we're all set up. So we'll see you inbound as we get close to Marvell. And like I said before, we're at that point going to start our turn and start descending down to an altitude where we can pick up an approach into Memphis. And as we can see over here as well. So if you're going to stick around for that, we'll see you in just a moment. All right, everybody, we are now coming up on 10 miles from Marvell VOR. We've set up for our turn for Victor 16, which technically takes us to Holly Springs, and that's on the course of 077. So outbound from Marvell VOR is 077, Victor 16 over to Holly Springs on 12-4. However, we won't fly all the way to Holly Springs. We're going to fly to Weston intersection, and then we'll be at a lower altitude by that point and be turning inbound for the approach. We're up at 10,000 feet, and we're going to want to descend shortly after crossing Marvell. I'll talk about that. Basically, there's a rule of thumb that you're given as far as figuring out when you want to descend, and that is for how many thousand feet you want to descend, multiply that by 3, and then cut off the last 3 zeros. And that's how many miles from a fix you might start to descend. So we're going to descend from 10,000 down to 5,000. And I've decided that because if I go over to Memphis International, and we're going to fly the ILS 36 left approach, all right, and I see over here that the localizer inbound from Weston, if you can see that right there, right? There's a course of 360, and we can basically get it down to 4,000 on our way into freeze, which is depicted over here. So since we're still going easterly at that point, I'm going to descend us down to 5,000. Let me go ahead and get this heading select set up, and then we're going to make our turn as we cross the VOR. So if we're going to descend 5,000 feet times 3, that's 15,000, right? 5,000 times 3 is 15,000. Chop off the last 3 zeros and you have 15 miles. Cool. So pretty easy math. Let's go ahead and turn to 077. In fact, I'm going to turn it to 097. Nice 20-degree intercept like we've been doing. All right. And then we'll intercept the course. Now, then I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my altitude select to 5,000 and make sure that's on altitude hold. If it's still on altitude select, it'll start descending right away. So we're going to put that down at 5,000. All right. And the next thing you might ask yourself is, well, how many feet per minute should I try to descend at? If I'm using the VS mode, which is what we're going to do for now. Okay, so, let me actually set up this course first before we get lost. So, 077. All right, and this got to stay on 109.6. So let's go ahead and now activate the VOR tracking, and now we're confident the aircraft will descend appropriately. Excellent. Okay, so like we said, what is the rate of descent? So the rule of thumb on that one is take your ground speed, which is conveniently right here. Actually, it's true airspeed, I believe, technically, but we're going to just use the ground speed right now. 289 times 5. All right. So you can grab your calculator app, or if you're good math whiz, you can do it in your head. And what do we say? 289 times 5 comes out to 1,445 feet per minute. So we're going to descend at about 1,500 feet per minute. And Weston is 24 miles outbound from Holly Springs, so we should set that up. Okay. Holly Springs is 112.4. So let's go ahead and put that in there now. Alright, we're getting a little warning there, so we'll acknowledge that. And we're showing 50 miles away from it, from the point, basically, or 25 miles away from the point, roughly. But I'm going to just start descending now to give us some extra time to work. So let's go ahead and put vertical speed mode. Alright, I'm going to start my descent at 1,500 feet per minute. I still have the indicated airspeed mode set over here. That should have been cruise for now. And, which we had before. I don't know how I switched that. Again, let's get this down. And I kind of gently start it, otherwise the auto throttles don't always keep up with pulling back. Alright, so we're somewhere around 1,500 feet per minute. And what's really important is to rearm the altitude select, otherwise it'll just descend right through 5,000 feet if you don't do that. The other thing I'm going to do in the meantime, now that we're heading out, is I'm going to go to my landing performance page. I'm going to click on In Sim for now. Usually I use Load Sheet, but this is a pretty short flight. I can see that my VREF is 136. I'm going to plan to shoot the approach at 141. I'm going to set the speed bugs, and I'm going to see that we're all set up over here as well. So we're tracking nicely outbound, right? Okay. So what we're doing basically is we're going out from Marvell on 109.6 on the 077. I should set up the course on nav2 for the 256, which is going to be 076. Is that reciprocal? So let's switch that by a degree. Alright, we're looking pretty good. Descending okay. Whoops, wrong button. Alright, we're looking good. We have our altitude select is armed. We're navving okay. And then we're supposed to switch over at the halfway point to Holly Springs. So 59, right? So looks like it's going to be what? That's 29.5 mile. We'll switch over, right? To Holly Springs. But what I'm going to do is just maybe about 25 miles out from Marvell. Instead, I'm going to switch over to the localizer frequency, right? So the localizer frequency that we're going to be using for this approach is right here, 108.9 for the ILS 36 left, 108.9, and the course is going to be 360. To show you on the Navigraph, right, we're making nice progress here as well. I'm going to take advantage of the overlay feature, and we have that dialed in. Okay, we can zoom in and out. I could adjust my transparency if I still want to see the routing underneath, right? So we're cool there. And what I also want to do is start slowing the airplane down. So let's go ahead, since we're about to level off, let's put it down at the flaps up maneuvering speed, which is basically that first bug right there. Okay, 1,000 to level off. All right, we have 10 miles to go before we reach Weston. And I'm going to actually lead that turn a little bit. So in the meantime, what I'm going to do then is I'm going to set up. We set the frequency is 108.9. So let's go ahead and set up 108.9. First of all, I need to get this into heading select mode. Make sure that our course is lined up first. Okay, and then let's go over to 108.9. Alright, so we're good there. Our speed is bleeding off nicely. And then I'm going to turn it to the inbound course. We said 360, so let's go ahead and set that up. So we're good there. Now I lost my DME on the DME one that happens sometimes with localizers initially, in X-plane at least. We're 4 miles out from Weston based on the nav 2. Alright, so if we look back over here, you can see that Weston 24-mile DME from Holly Springs, right? Okay, but we're going to be turning. I'm going to turn it a little bit early. Alright, so let's have a look over here again. Take note of our progress here. And what we want to do is when we get inbound, I'm going to start descending down to 4,000, and we're going to do some step downs. So I'm going to put in flaps 1, and I'm going to slow this now down to toward the flaps 5 speed. In fact, I'll even use flaps 5 right now. It's okay.
Flaps 5.
Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the aircraft on an intercept. So we said the course is kind of weird that it's showing 000. Usually it shows 360. Okay, and I'm going to get an intercept going here. All right. Let's have a look over here. You can kind of take advantage of that nicely. But this should keep us outside of freeze pretty nicely, this intercept. And we're going to take it down to 4,000. So let's go ahead and put this back to heading altitude hold, 4,000. Alright, I'm going to put it on VS mode now. Get it going down. We'll do a gentle 1,500 feet per minute again. I don't want to get the airplane kind of crazy. And put that back on altitude select. Here comes the localizer. So now I'm going to turn the airplane inbound to intercept that localizer. You can see it down here. Might come in a little fast, so we might have to just overshoot it a little bit. Okay. So now looking pretty good. Alright. Excellent. And what I'm going to do now is, as the wings come level, I'm going to now put in flaps 10 and go to the flaps 10 bug speed, which looks like about 176 today. Cool. Okay, now what I'm going to do is, now that I'm inbound, I don't know if you have to do this on this particular autopilot, but a lot of airplanes you do. If you want to use the ILS glide slope mode, you have to have both frequencies tuned in. And that might just be for AutoNav, but I'm kind of used to doing that. I mean, I don't do it very often regardless, but hey, why not? Let's just put it in. Okay, so we're 4,000, we're inbound. I'm going to put this on VOR again. And then what I'm going to do is going to have a look over here, and we're going to look at the profile. It says once you reach freeze, which is a DME of 14, you could step it down to 3,000. If we go over here, you can also see it as well. So let's make this a little bit larger for you. Alright, so once you cross freeze, DME 14, you can go from 4,000 down to 3,000. Alright. So what are we at? 15.3, and we said 14, right? So I'm going to, since we're in, let's put this on altitude hold, set up 3,000. And I'm going to set up on flaps 20. and slow us down a little bit more than about 158. Alright. And then we're inside of 14. Let's go to vertical speed. Okay. We have a little bit more drag now, so I'm feeling confident that we can get, you know, down without speeding up too much. We don't want to lose control of the speed. Okay, and then when we level off at 3, I'm going to arm the ILS mode. I see the airport out in front of us. Alright, there it is. 3-6 left. We're tracking real nice. Okay. Looking good. You can see the approach over here. Nice, nice, nice. Did we put... Oh my gosh, look at that. We almost messed up. I've done that too many times. Okay, we just leveled off in time. I'm going to put this on the ILS mode now. I got the glide slope armed. Sweet. Got a little slow, but hopefully the autopilot will recover for us. We'll keep an eye on it. Okay, looking pretty good. Right? Okay, we're going to wait for that to turn green. And that glide slope out of 3,000 is about 9.9. We chose to pick it up from there. So I'm going to put the gear down. There it is.
Gear down.
And flaps 25. We're getting a gear warning. We're getting a gear warning because we went to a landing configuration before the gear was already all the way down, but that's going to silence in a moment. You're going to hear that in a moment.
Gears down.
All right. And we could slow it down to flaps 25 speed. And I'm going to go right over to flaps 30 speed, which happens to be our VREF plus 5 today. And we're going to go to flaps 30.
Flaps 30.
And here we go, guys. This thing is all set to land. All you got to do now is, if you wanted to, you could disengage the autopilot, which I usually do. Oh, sorry. We should be in go-round mode. Oh, yeah, good. We're all set there. All right. So if need be, we could execute our go-around and get our maximum thrust needed. And that's really it, everybody. This airplane is all set to land. Our speed's looking good, right? Basically it was 136, or was it? What was it again? It was 136 plus 5 would have been 141. So we could go ahead and just dial that into 141, let it slow down a little bit more. Okay. We're on VREF plus 5, and this airplane's looking nice and stable. Hey, let's do a little flyby, why not? Oh yeah. Look at that bird go.